What is going on, guys, and welcome back to the channel, and today we are going to be doing a complete hero guide for one of my favourite characters to play in Star Wars Battlefront 2, KYLO REN. In these hero guides we are going to be covering everything that could possibly need covering, from base stats, ability stats, the best star cards for Galactic Assault and Supremacy, as well as some of the best maps to choose them on, some general tips for those game modes, the best star cards for heroes vs villains and HvV Showdown, which enemy characters you need to look out for, and then lastly covering some general tips for the hero game modes as well. So as you can see, this guide is going to be breaking down every single aspect of the hero. If you're new around here and you end up enjoying this video, then be sure to subscribe to the channel for more Battlefront 2 content, and be sure to hit that notification bell as well so that you are notified each time I upload more videos like this going forward. But anyway, with that out of the way, let's get stuck right into it. So starting off with KYLO's base stats, and he does have a pretty solid set of stats all around. Starting off with his base HP, he has 750, which is pretty much the average of any Saber user in the game, and as for how much health he can regenerate at once, his regen is 250, which again is essentially the average for Saber heroes in Battlefront 2. In terms of his Saber damage, he deals 125 damage from the front and 165 damage from behind, so as is the case with pretty much every Saber hero, he can one-hit kill any troopers from behind other than a heavy. Now, because his Saber damage is so high, he has a swing speed of roughly 1.8 swings per second, which is actually a little bit slower than most Saber heroes in the game, just to make up for that higher damage output. He's able to swing 14 times before running out of stamina, and he's able to block 14 lightsaber attacks before running out of stamina as well, which are both really high compared to most, so like I said earlier, his base stats are pretty solid across the board. Now moving on to his abilities, and in my opinion he does have one of the best sets of abilities in the entire game, and especially one of the more deadly sets of abilities at that. His left ability is called Pull, and exactly as it sounds, this just causes KYLO to pull anyone within the area of effect towards him, knocking them off their feet and also dealing 10 damage to anyone that it hits. It has a 20-second cooldown time after you've used it, which is pretty much what you'd expect. It's on the longer side, but it's definitely not too long considering how good the ability can be. This ability is great for crowd control and putting the fight on your terms. You can often pull 3 or 4 enemies towards you and take them out in a much easier fight than it might have been beforehand. Moving on, we have his middle ability, which is called Frenzy, and this ability is also incredibly good when it comes to crowd control. When activated, KYLO leaps to any nearby enemies, having pretty much auto aim for his saber, and once an enemy dies, he will actually jump to another enemy if they are within range. The ability has 3 attacks, and each attack deals 160 damage to troopers or 105 damage to heroes, and it also gives 50% damage reduction as well, so you are much less vulnerable when the ability is active. Frenzy only has a 10-second cooldown, which is actually insane for how good this ability is, and so because of that, it is definitely his best ability. Now for his right ability, we have Freeze, and exactly as it sounds, this just freezes anyone within the area of effect. The freeze will last for 2 seconds or until the frozen enemy is hit with a lightsaber attack, and it requires a 25-second cooldown, which is a little bit on the longer side, but that's definitely fair as this ability can be extremely overpowered in the right situation. So that is it for all of his base stats and abilities, and now we are going to move on to some tips for Galactic Assault and Supremacy, starting off with his best star cards. Keep in mind these cards are just a matter of opinion. There aren't really any loadouts in the game that are objectively the best or anything like that, but these are just what I find to work best in these modes. The first card I'd recommend is his Closing In card, and this one just increases the leap distance between his frenzy attacks, allowing you to kill enemies from further away with the ability. Now I don't believe it actually increases the initial leap, just the leaps between each hit, but it is still really helpful and allows you to chain together some really solid multi-kills. The second card I'd recommend is the Bloodlust card, and this one just increases the damage of his frenzy attack by up to 20 extra damage per hit. Now the damage is already enough to one-hit kill most of the troopers in the game, so this might seem pointless. However, this is especially good against reinforcements, as that extra 60 damage can often make it so that one frenzy attack will kill any reinforcement in the entire game, so this one definitely comes in clutch much more often than you'd think. The third card I'd recommend is his Power Reach card, and this one just increases the area of effect of his pull ability by up to 30%. Now this ability is great for crowd control like I mentioned earlier, and can also help a lot against blaster heroes, so being able to pull them to your feet from even further away does just add to your range, and therefore makes KYLO a lot more versatile because of it. Personally, I think these are definitely the 3 best cards for these modes. However, if you do disagree, then definitely let us all know down in the comments what you prefer to use. There is no right or wrong when it comes to star cards, so feel free to leave your own recommendations. Now moving on to the best maps to choose him on in Galactic Assault, the 3 maps that I personally think he's best on are Kashyyyk, Crate and Naboo. Those are just the 3 that I've seemed to do the best with him on over the last 3 years. However, the usual maps that I mentioned for Saber heroes like Death Star, Tatooine and Yavin 4 are also pretty solid choices. Honestly, he can do well on almost any map, but for me, these are the three that I would choose as some of his best. Now, moving on to some general tips for Galactic Assault and Supremacy, KYLO is really well suited to an aggressive playstyle. His abilities are all so deadly, and combined with his damage output, he's definitely the type of hero that you should be playing with the intent to play fast. In a very similar way to Luke, his ability combos can definitely add even further to his damage output, as they all just seem to gel together so well to where it almost feels silly to use one ability without using some of the others as well. Generally speaking, when it comes to crowd control, as in taking on groups of 4, 5 or even more enemies, then combining the pull ability with Frenzy is a match made in heaven. If you can pull most or all of those enemies to your feet, you can usually swing once with your saber and damage them before they get a chance to roll, and then if you quickly use Frenzy after that first hit, even if they do roll and miss one attack, they'll be killed by the second attack anyway. And so with the press of about 3 or 4 buttons, you can often take out a whole group of enemies without even ever putting yourself in a position of danger. Another great combination you can use is combining the pull with the freeze ability as well, getting the enemies off their feet, freezing them in midair, and then actually just letting your teammates damage or kill them to allow that freeze to last the full length, rather than just shortening the time when you hit them with your saber. In a situation like that, you can often just clean up the scraps as well with a quick Frenzy or just a regular saber attack afterwards on the enemies who weren't killed. So just from those 2 examples alone, I'm sure you can see what I mean when I say that his ability combinations can be deadly, and I'd argue they may actually be the most deadly combos in the entire game, only really rivaled by maybe Luke or Vader. One thing that I know I can struggle with sometimes though is actually just getting a bit too confident with KYLO, knowing how strong his abilities can be, and oftentimes I'll just play far too aggressive and try for a huge Frenzy multi-kill or something like that, when I know deep down I probably shouldn't go for it. So it is just worth mentioning that you obviously aren't invincible. I think it's also worth noting too that you don't want to become too reliant on your abilities to where that's all you ever do. KYLO does deal a lot of damage with his saber and also has some really good stamina stats, so you do still want to be making the most of those as much as possible, mostly just saving the abilities for either when you really need them or when you see an opportunity for a nice big multi-kill, but like I said, don't expect it to go flawlessly every time. Other than that, he is really just a fairly generic saber hero in terms of the way that he should be played. He's not overly fast like Luke or Maul, he's not overly team-based like Rey, he's not overly defensive like Obi-Wan, and so he does just kind of have a weird sort of plain playstyle at the end of the day. Outside of the ability combinations, he doesn't necessarily excel in any one area like any of those other heroes that I mentioned, so he can be a little bit more cookie cutter in other areas of his game. To summarize, if you play aggressively and make the most of those combos, then you can definitely dominate the other team as KYLO. He can put out a lot of damage and be one of the more aggressive heroes in the game, but with a slower swing speed and a slow sprint speed as well, you do still want to be careful of getting too far ahead of yourself, so play fast but play smart at the same time. So now moving on to the hero vs villain game modes, and just like the trooper modes, KYLO is a pretty solid character in these modes if you play him right. I wouldn't say he's the best in the game or anything like that, but he can definitely hold his own. Starting off with his star cards, and funnily enough, KYLO is one of the few characters in the game that I actually use the exact same star cards for in all game modes, so the 3 that I use were already mentioned in the GA and Supremacy section. Now, if you're not a fan of one of those, then there is a really solid 4th option, which is the Resilience card, and this one is essentially tailor-made for these game modes, mostly HvV, but it is solid for Showdown as well. This card pretty much just makes it so that if you are close to another villain on your team, then you will gain up to 20 more damage per strike and 10% damage reduction as well, for essentially however long you're close to that teammate. So this one is obviously really handy to use. Unfortunately, it's near on impossible to find the actual distance that this covers, but it seems to work even when you're not immediately next to the teammate. So I have used this card before and it does seem to work pretty damn well. Now, moving on to some enemies that you might need to keep an eye out for in these modes, and if I'm honest, I think Luke is the only threat to KYLO in these modes. Obviously, anyone can kill you if you're not playing it smart or if they're just really good at the game, but Luke is really the only character that seems to be a consistent threat to KYLO. Any other saber users can be handled pretty easily if you play it smart, and blaster heroes are pretty much no issue at all, but like I said earlier, that does not mean you're invincible. Now, finally moving on to just some regular tips for these hero game modes, and as is becoming a recurring sentence in these guides, his playstyle in these modes pretty much mirrors that of the large scale game modes. Be aggressive and make the most of those ability combos. KYLO can absolutely melt the enemy team if you're combining those abilities, and it's even more effective if you're playing it with your teammates as well. What I mentioned earlier about KYLO freezing enemies and leaving them for his teammates is even more important when it comes to these game modes. Freezing someone right in front of, say, Iden or Phasma is going to result in an almost certain death for that enemy. Even if they do survive the damage, they're going to be far too hurt to be able to win that 1v1 or 1v2 anyway, so it's definitely a very strong tactic. Now, I know a lot of people will probably be mad at me me for giving out tactics like this, as honestly it is super scummy and it's very frustrating to be on the receiving end of this, but at the end of the day I make these guides for newer and less experienced players to improve their gameplay, and I can't give you guys the best tips on how to do well while also just leaving out some of the best tips simply because some people, myself included, don't really like those tips. So say what you will, but at the end of the day I can't skip out on good tips like that in what's meant to be a pretty well-rounded guide. Other than that though, there really isn't anything I can mention in these modes that I didn't already cover in the GA and Supremacy section. KYLO is somewhat of a self-explanatory hero in that his abilities are super deadly, and if you just simply combine them with his regular saber attacks, he is generally just going to do very well. One thing that I will say is that with a slower swing speed like KYLO, making the most of your block is actually really important, because if you're trying to swing spam a blaster hero and they're shooting at you, they can actually kill you pretty quickly since your swing speed isn't as fast as some of the other saber heroes in the game. So it is worth getting in a few hits, blocking and letting their blaster bolts deal damage to themselves, and then getting back on the offensive once they realise what's going on. To summarise, once again, you should be playing aggressively and making the most of your ability combos, and you should also be wary of swing spamming as it can get you killed, but if you can mix a few blocks in the middle of your swings and just play it a little bit smarter, then you should be able to counter blaster heroes with no trouble at all. So that is going to do it for this KYLO REN hero guide, guys. I'm very keen to keep on pumping these out over the coming months, and hopefully if I can master each character myself, then I will get out a guide on every single character in the game. If you enjoyed the video and it did help you guys out, then be sure to leave a like down below to support the channel, and be sure to subscribe with those notifications on so you don't miss out on any more Star Wars Battlefront 2 content. Thank you all so much for watching. You guys have a great day, and I'll catch you all in the next one.